I welcome everyone this Mother's Day, what an auspicious day, to have our second webinar in the 2020 Go Green Network online series. Just to begin with some ground rules for everyone to follow to make this an enjoyable session. Please keep your mic muted unless you are invited to share by the presenter. This just makes the overall audio quality a lot better and everyone will be able to hear Brother Keval. If you have any questions, please drop it in the chat box and we will answer it. There will be sections during the webinar where you will be invited to ask questions and Keval will answer it directly. And most importantly, make sure that you have fun, take notes. Remember that after this session, whether you're male or female, everyone will be a mother because you'll be taking care of little plant babies. With that, I'd like to now invite Sister Shruti Vijay Kumar, who is a member of the Environmental Sustainability Committee. She is a young adult from Australia and she is an enthusiastic nature lover. Over to Sister Shruti.
Om Shri Sai Ram, everyone. Wonderful to be with you all on this auspicious day, as mentioned, Kalai. On behalf of both the Environmental Sustainability Committee and the Serve the Planet team, really just wanted to extend a very warm welcome to all of you and really grateful and thankful to Swami that we've got this space to share together. One of the major messages that both of our committees have really been promoting in unison is this idea that caring for the environment or caring for nature is inherently a sadhana. It's not just something that's nice to do or good for the planet, but it's at a deeper level, a way that we can transform ourselves, that we can purify ourselves, that we can more and more experience the beautiful love that Swami is, that resides within us. And I think gardening is just one of the most beautiful sadhanas, or the most beautiful practices that not only gives us, a very tangible benefit, many of which we'll hear later from Brother Keval in terms of, food, and it nourishes the earth, but it's really a beautiful way that we can learn from Swami's creation. Many of you would have heard the quote from Swami where he says, "The universe is a university for man." And I think gardening is such a beautiful way in which we can really learn from nature by being in such close contact and being a part of this beautiful circle of life. Personally, I think I've been more actively gardening probably for the last 2 or 3 years. And there's many lessons that the garden and the plants and the fruit have taught me, as I'm sure they've taught the many gardeners in this room. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of them before handing back to Sister Kale. One that I'm sure many gardeners will relate to is how the garden teaches us gratitude. Even to grow one cauliflower or one broccoli takes so much water and care and tending, and the amount of energy and resource and sunlight and effort it takes even to grow something so small and so simple is enormous. I think what gardening does is it gives us an appreciation. It's given me an appreciation of just how much it goes into producing something small. And when that appreciation and that gratitude is there, it's so easy not to waste. It's so easy to eat every crumb and to appreciate every morsel of food. Something like sealing on desires isn't something that one forces on oneself, but really flows from this love and this appreciation for nature. One of the favorite things I've appreciated about composting, which we'll hear about as well in this workshop, is the idea that nothing in nature is waste. As humans, we've got this idea that some things can be thrown away and some things are waste and some things are useful. But even a dead leaf, even the seed of, fruit, even the skin, becomes beautiful soil and nourishes our food. So the idea that nothing is waste, I think, is a beautiful lesson for us to see value in all situations, in all foods, in all items, in all people and everything in life, really. Gardening for me has been a beautiful trigger, a way to sort of deepen my sadhana. And one of the things I love to do is, while gardening, just chanting the Gayatri mantra. And that's been amazing for me personally, as I'm sure many of you would have seen, just how much more effectively and bigger and more healthy our food grows when we can chant and sort of, really put our good energy into whatever we're growing. I think gardening for me has really given me an appreciation for the subtle energies that are at play that we sometimes forget in our lives when we're caught up in our day-to-day things. And finally, one of the most beautiful things I think gardening and nature teaches us as well is discipline. Everything's got its rhythm, its season. There's a time to plant, a time to prune, a time to harvest. everything's got its time and place, and it's such a great lesson, even in our own lives, to really have some discipline and some structure and realize there's a time and place, a season for a time of the day. You know, Swami even tells us for meditation, for contemplation, for prayer, a time for activity, a time for rest, just as there is in the garden. So really, this was just a brief sort of opening remark from our committees, but want to wish you all a wonderful welcome to this session, and hope we can all, with Swami's grace, take away lots of inspiration, practical tips and learnings that will ultimately help us grow closer to Swami. Finally, it'll be shared later on, but do check out both the Serve the Planet Committee website and the Environmental Sustainability Committee website. There's lots of rich resources, lots of tips and tools that can help you really explore caring for nature as a sadhana, and hopefully help all of us progress on this journey. Sairam, everyone.
Thank you, Sister Shruti, for those opening remarks. I'd like to now hand over to Bijal Shah, who will introduce Dr. Kevo Shah and the topic for today.
Jai Saram, everybody. Welcome to today's Go Green Network webinar on planting the seeds of love. And thank you to our sisters who so beautifully put the tone of today. This is a beginner's guide on how to grow your own food and reconnect with Mother Earth and nature. This is, in essence, practical spirituality. Your webinar presenter today is Dr. Kevo Shah, who hails from London, UK. By profession, he is a dental surgeon and has served at the Sri Sathya Sai General Hospital Dental Department as part of the International Dental Rota for many years. In 2018, Dr. Kevo Shah led a global team of young adults in organizing and presenting action-based solutions at the Go Green exhibition. He is committed to serving Mother Earth and currently serves as one of the national Serve the Planet coordinators. His experience within the environmental movement over the last 20 years includes educating schools and organizations on animal rights, sustainability, and conservation. He's also one of the co-directors of Animal Interfaith Alliance within the UK. He's sharing with us today his experience of growing organic fruit, vegetables, and plants, and of course, top tips on how we can get started in creating a haven of organic fruit and vegetables of our own. Now more than ever, sustainable living is vital for us. So over to Dr. Kevo Shah to take us through this wonderful opportunity to plant the seeds of love.
Thank you very much, Bijal. And thank you to Sister Shruti for that beautiful summary of all the spiritual aspects of growing your own food, cleaning your space. Very, very well put out. Thank you so much, Sister. Sairam to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Firstly, thank you to Swami for this wonderful opportunity to share with you everything that we've learned and everything that we've experienced. And thank you all for taking the time to be on. Firstly, I would like to state that I'm no expert on this. I've been trying to grow food for a few years now, and I want to share my experience and learning so that we can inspire each other. But I'm sure there must be a lot of you out there on this webinar who have a lot more years behind you, a lot more experience. And if you have any tips, any advice, any great points to give to us, to share with us, please do so. There will be gaps in this presentation for questions and for any thoughts and reflections that you have. Now, personally for me, since the lockdown started for all of us, I've been thinking of how we can serve the planet more effectively while being at home. How can we stay positive, be more productive with our time, and make our efforts more progressive? And these questions were the catalyst for learning more about this topic, practicing at home, and creating this webinar to share with you all. As Swami says, be, do, and then tell. So let us start by keeping the gardens of Prashanti in mind. We just need to walk through the ashram to realize how perfectly they've been created. It's a bit like walking through a piece of heaven, if you can imagine it. And we feel an incredible sense of peace and love and gratitude for Mother Nature, for being so generous to us in so many ways. not just providing us with food, but also oxygen, shelter, and regulating the air and climate. For me, this is my tangible way of easily connecting with God and realizing the oneness within us all. So what we want to do, we want to get through this webinar in a way that we can inspire each other in creating that haven in our homes, even if we don't have a garden. Growing vegetables and flowers within our homes is also, I feel, incredibly humbling and satisfying. And obviously all of this with the ultimate aim of connecting with God through nature. So in summary, aims of today, appreciate why it is important to grow food. It is important that we try and understand this first so that whatever we do after has meaning and has substance to it. How can we grow it? Easy tips, using everyday items, and through this journey, reconnect with Mother Nature. So why is it important? And I think for all of us, there comes a lot of reasons in mind. Firstly, as Sister Shruti said, it helps us truly appreciate the value of food. We realize how much water, how much time, how much energy goes into even growing one type of vegetable or fruit. And when we do so, when we realize this, we stop wasting it immediately. Also, what we want to do is produce clean food, which is free from toxins. For obvious reasons, as everything that we produce goes into our bodies, and we want it to be as clean and as toxin-free as possible. It also enables us to recycle food, and this is done in two ways. Firstly, by composting, and secondly, by taking the seeds of some of the vegetables that we have and replanting them. Nature has given us the perfect mechanism for recycling, and it's time that we took advantage of this. It also adds nutrition to the soil, again, in two ways. Firstly, certain plants like beans, leguminous plants, they take nitrogen from the soil and add nitrogen from the air and add it to the soil, increasing nutrients in there. And secondly, when they decompose, again, these can be added to the soil, and this increases nutrition as well. Also, it creates a haven for our animal friends. Since we've started growing fruits and vegetables and plants in our garden, we're seeing more and more animals come to our garden: birds, bees, cats, all of these beautiful animals that we'd otherwise, want to see. They're coming, readily into a garden and taking advantage of the space that we've created for them. Obviously, it's a great form of exercise, great workout for the back, the shoulders, the arms, the legs, full body workout. And it's extremely enjoyable as well. Obviously, it's a great way of obtaining vitamin D, spending more time outside, especially now that we need to really boost our immunity in so many ways. But what about the bigger picture? What are the larger benefits of learning how to grow food? Well, if you think about what is happening right now, there's a gradual but definite collapse of global civilization as we know it. And there's a very real threat of pandemics on the horizon, more pandemics on the horizon. It's becoming incredibly obvious that we need to find ways to become more self-sustainable, while at the same time lowering our carbon, our energy, our waste, and resource footprint. Now, obviously, most of us have a long way to go before we can declare ourselves self-sustainable, but we must start somewhere. Thankfully, one of the easiest and most effective ways of becoming self-sustainable is learning how to grow as much food as possible, not just for ourselves, but for the community at large, because this is how we can support each other in a sustainable manner. What about the question of energy? Well, when we're able to grow our food and green our space, we're able to tap into solar and geothermal energy. These are free sources of energy falling onto us every day. And obviously the geothermal energy that's locked in the ground in our lawns, it originates from the sun. But doing this helps us to lower our energy footprint as well. Now, as we all know, energy exists in so many forms, but it is only in certain forms that our bodies, our vessels, are able to utilize it. And food is one of the fundamental ways of incorporating that energy of the sun into our cells. What a miracle. But on a deeper level, it helps us realize that we are just consciousness, locked in these vessels of organic matter, powered by the energy from the source, so that we can use this energy to serve others. And that when our vessels die and decompose, the energy returns back to the universe, transferred into another form, while our consciousness remains eternal. What a great way of understanding the interconnectedness and oneness of all of us. And what about Mother Earth herself? What about what's happening to our planet? Now, I've said the second line here is healing the biosphere. Our biosphere is composed of the litho, which is the land, the hydro, the water, and atmosphere, the air. We're all aware of the breakdown of our climate today, the pollution, the destruction of our rainforests, the death of our oceans, and the loss of biodiversity, the extinctions happen every single day. And if you look at the data, if we look at the research, we realize that the biggest cause of most of the ecological emergencies that we're facing is the production of certain foods that humanity is still eating every day. Specifically, when animal products like meat, dairy, eggs, and fishes are produced from the exploitation of trillions of animals forced to be born every year, we end up using up most of our planet's fresh water, most of our planet's rainforested land, and most of our planet's fossil fuels. And on top of that, we release more greenhouse gas emissions through this than all forms of transportation combined. But when we understand this and make that connection, we easily come to the answer. That when we start growing and consuming plant-based foods, we use a tiny fraction of all of these resources, reduce our carbon, energy, and waste footprint by 80 to 90%. And the best thing is that as more and more land gets released as we transition away from animal-based foods to plant-based foods, we can allow that land to regenerate into the forests that they once were, into the natural habitats that they once were. This action alone will help in soaking up most of the excess carbon that's been released since the Industrial Revolution, and also in halting the extinction of life on Earth. This is the solution to most of the ecological emergencies that we're facing. And Swami has always provided us with the answer by always encouraging us to serve Mother Nature and to not hurt others. Help ever, hurt never. This model of growing food and trees and greening our spaces obviously needs to be started at our home. Let's remember Swami's words, be, do, tell. And when we can extend that model to include our back gardens, our front yards, our sidewalks and parks, we can return land back to nature. Because if we think of what this earth was like before we start building our towns, our cities, our infrastructure, it was covered by trees. It was covered by natural habitats, homes to billions of beautiful animals and countless species. So it is our duty to return that land back to nature. We cannot obviously reverse the extinctions that have already happened, but in this way we can help recover dwindling animal and plant populations and set an example in our own communities and the world that this is how we start healing our planet. Again, what we want to do is encourage people to not use any artificial fertilizer or toxins. Now, for those of us who might not be aware, artificial fertilizer was invented in the early part of the 20th century by two German scientists by the name of Haber and Bosch. And this was done as a reaction to the apparent fear that there was going to be a global food shortage. And what they did was that they found a way to take nitrogen from the air and convert it into ammonia and nitrates that plants can use to grow really quickly. But this quick fix came with a very heavy price because they used methane to capture nitrogen. Now, methane is not only a carbon-based fossil fuel that is being drilled and released from the depths of the earth, but it's also a greenhouse gas that is 23 times more potent than CO2. We have enough problems dealing with the tons of methane being released today from the tundra melting, as the permafrost is melting in the tundra. And yet we keep releasing it unnaturally for something that is completely unnecessary. As we move on, we think about nitrous oxide. When artificial fertilizer is placed on the land, the nitrates and the ammonia convert to nitrous oxide, and that's released into the air as well. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So we have now 3 powerful greenhouse gases being added to the atmosphere because of the way we're growing food. By not using any of the artificial fertilizer toxins, we're making it a safe space for organisms and nutrients. Because this stuff is so potent, it ends up killing them. It ends up burning off the nutrients in the ground. Also, it does not contribute to dead zones when we don't use artificial fertilizer. Dead zones are areas in the world. Now, if you have a look at the picture on the lower left, you see all these blue and red areas. These are areas where no life exists in the oceans anymore. There are no fishes anymore because the amount of oxygen that's in the water has been depleted completely. And the reason why this is happening is because there's a lot of runoff of all this fertilizer and all these nutrients running off into the ocean, into the water. And what they do is they create an algal bloom. All this algae starts to grow on the surface and on the top layers, and it inhibits the sunlight reaching the deeper layers and the plants and some of the other photosynthetic organisms that add oxygen to the water. But not only that, when these algae decompose, they start using up the remaining oxygen and deplete it completely. So what we want to do is go away from them. We've already lost 90% of all the fishes, all the ocean beings in the world. We do not want to lose any more. And lastly, it becomes a safe space for other animals as well when we don't use things like pesticides and herbicides. When they're used, what happens is it also ends up killing bees, other insects, and when birds eat them, birds end up dying as well. And I've had a lot of conversations with some of my patients who are growing food, and a lot of them use slug pellets as well. And these not only end up killing the slugs, but also end up killing hedgehogs and other animals. Let's try and steer away from it. Let's try and grow this as compassionately as we can. And lastly, it is an incredibly enjoyable activity for all the family, especially for children, because when children start to see the alchemy of nature, when they start to see that the food that they've grown is turning into something that they can eat and something they can use, it is so inspiring. It's moments that stay with them for the rest of their lives. It teaches them the importance of food and not to waste it. But for me, it's been an incredible time of bonding with my family. I still remember some of the years that I spent, planting food with my dad, and we spent so much time outside bonding and just, experiencing this fun activity together. I would give everyone a great tip. If you have kids, one of the best ways of getting them into this is to start growing sunflowers. Sunflowers grow really fast, but their changes are incredibly dramatic as well, especially the giant varieties. And not only that, once the petals come off, you can take the head and take the seeds out and eat them. And you can do everything just in one. And it's a great way of reminding children about how miraculous nature is. So I think let's take this time to reflect and think about when it was the first time for us when we truly felt connected with Mother Nature. I think we have a brother here on the webinar. Let's have a look. N, are you with us? No, he's not. Okay. Okay, anyone else? Would you like to share with any experiences or any thoughts or even any tips that you might have before we carry on? Okay. please keep it in mind, please reflect, and then there'll be lots more opportunities for us to share our thoughts as well. So what we want to do when we do this is embrace the 4 eco principles. And just to outline them for you, it means protecting and increasing life in the soil. Because if you think about what soil is the foundation to everything that we're trying to do here. If the soil is healthy, the food that we produce is healthy. And when we eat that, we become healthy as well. And on the reverse side, if it's not healthy, if it's depleted, everything else becomes depleted. Number 2, we want to optimally use the space that we have. So some of us, might not have gardens. We might just be, have balcony or very limited space. We can still use this to grow as much food as possible. Using containers we would otherwise throw away. Now, this is a great way of reducing waste, especially everything that comes out from our homes. And we've found that we've literally halved, if not more, the amount of waste that we're throwing away. And in a manner that is beneficial to the biosphere. So in a manner that we're adding life, or not taking it away. So what are some of the requirements? There's just a few basic requirements that we need to get going. Number 1, seeds, obviously, or even used up vegetables. Now, just a point to add regards to seeds, when we go and buy them in the supermarket, especially in England, most of them are hybrids. And by that, I mean they've been modified in ways to make them resistant to frost, resistant to diseases, and they generally grow really well. Obviously, you can also obtain heirloom seeds, organic seeds, seeds that have not been modified, but we have to bear in mind that they might not be as resistant. It is something that a lot of experienced gardeners tend to get. So just my personal opinion, if you're doing this for the first time, try and get hybrids, try and get some strong seeds that are able to overcome some of the challenges that they might face, because what we don't want to do is get put off in the first year when things don't work out. Containers, we have lots of them, especially again with the foods that we buy, we're left with so much in terms of packaging. We need compost. And we need topsoil. And I'm just going to clarify the difference for you all, because I wasn't aware of this until a couple of years ago. Compost is the nutrition in the soil. It's the organic matter that's rotting and adding nutrition. So that nutrition is being transferred to the plants. And topsoil is the framework, the structure that holds the nutrition, holds the plants and everything else in the soil with it. So if I were to give you an analogy, if you think about a house, the walls, the brickwork, the doors, the windows, all of the framework, that's the topsoil. And the compost is the people living in it, the beings giving life to that house. That is what compost is. A point to add about topsoil, our earth has lost more than 50% of topsoil, which is the top 1 to 2 meters of the soil that we have that we can grow food with. 50%, more than that has been lost. And it's not something that we can make over a period of 5 to 10 years quickly. It takes about 150 to 200 years to make really good topsoil. So what we don't want to do is erode it away. What we don't want it to do is leave it to the elements to be washed away or degraded. What we want to do is add to it, and especially extending that to agricultural practices. So have a look at this in your own time. Polythene, again, we have abundant material of this because we end up with it when we buy anything, and especially food. The packaging, the plastic packaging comes with it. That's what I'm talking about. Certain tools, just four tools that you need to get started with. If you have a look at the picture on the left, fork, a spade, a shovel, and something called a Dutch hoe, H-O-E. And what this does, it's really, really good at removing weeds really fast. Obviously, we need markers, because if you planted seeds in the garden or anywhere else, even in pots, we need to know what we're growing, and we need to know the date that we sowed the seed, because it'll give us an idea if things are germinating, if things are coming through, because sometimes things don't come through, and it gives you an idea that, what, it's not working this time, so I'm going to start with something else. Netting, very, very important if you can get this, because what it does, it prevents a lot of the insects from attacking the plants and vegetables. And obviously fresh water and sun. Okay. So I just wanted to give you a really great tip when it comes to containers and creating a really nice vessel for your seedling. So if you imagine, if you have a look on the first picture, we have this container left after buying mushrooms, for example. A lot of these containers that have vegetables in them, they have holes in them already because these foods need to be aerated. But what we want to do is use a double container system whereby the bottom container is impenetrable. So it can hold water and the top container can hold the seedling and the compost. So the second picture, what we've done is put some polythene wrapping there to make it impenetrable, block all the holes there. Third picture, we put a couple of pebbles in there to raise the level and create a reservoir where water can be present. And on top of that, we put just another container with the seedling and the compost with holes in it again. So what we have is we've reduced the risk of overwatering and underwatering, which is a very important component of when we're trying to germinate and grow seedlings. If you overwater, the water goes through the compost and it ends up in the reservoir underneath. If there's ever a time that you underwatered it or the compost starts to dry up, the water can be soaked up through capillary action and again hydrate the seedling. So a great way of not only recycling, upcycling waste, the containers that you have, but also a great way of growing food. I just wanted to share with you a small video that we made where I wanted to show you how we can use a plant milk packet or even an orange juice packet to make a really great container for your seedlings. So I just play that for you. So what we've done is cut the top half of it, sorry, the top 3/4 of it, and we've inverted it into the bottom half. So the bottom half becomes a reservoir, the top half becomes the container for the seedling, and the little hole, which is the outlet for the juice or the plant milk, becomes an access point for water to drain through and be taken up. It's a really great way of upcycling and using a container to grow your seedlings. Another great tip, now a lot of us might be left with plastic water bottles or even fizzy pop bottles. We can cut a window in them and topple it on the side, put your compost, and again create a little reservoir on the sides of it with stones. The water can come and collect. But it's a great container for growing herbs, especially coriander, rosemary, dill, etc. Again, great way of upcycling your waste. Markers, obviously very important to know what you're growing where. What we've done, we started using used up toilet rolls to mark what we're growing where in the garden. So again, a great way of marking. Used up starch-based cutlery that we had left. We've used that, put that in the ground to mark it up. Again, just wanted to share with you a small video of how we're doing this. So let's watch that.
So what we're trying to do is grow more vegetables like beetroots, onion, radishes, and what we're going to do is use toilet rolls. We're isolating and we're going to try and make the most use of our time and also the most use of everything that we have. All right, so let's carry on. So what I've done is actually dug out little holes about 2-inch deep, about 10 centimeters apart from each other. And the way we're going to do this is put a little bit of compost there, stick a toilet roll in, and then put a seed in, and then put some more compost in, cover it up, and then put the soil around. Now, the benefit of this is that it actually prevents birds from picking out the seeds, especially if you have chickens or even birds who come around and they try and look for earthworms or look for seeds. This protects the seeds until the leaves come through and the shoots come through, and by that time hopefully it'll be too late for them to pick the seed. Okay, so that's the trick. Toilet rolls, compost, soil, and remember, all of this you can actually do it indoors. If you're doing it indoors, you don't need any of this setup, you just need compost and seeds.
But have a look on the pictures on the right. We have what we've done is just use some of the netting that we get when we buy vegetables and put a rubber band around it. But the bottom right is really important. If you can get netting, it'll help, like I said before, prevent the insects from attacking, especially some of the leafy vegetables that you're trying to grow. So the chicken that I mentioned in that video, this is Ruby on the left. This is our little chicken, a little chicken baby that we rescued about 4 years ago from an egg farm. And she's been with us ever since. She's about 7 to 8 years old. And you know what? She inspires us every day to make this world a better place for everyone on this planet. And I'm so grateful that we can share our time and our life with her. What she's doing, she's approving something called plant-based compost that we were able to get. Now, the company that we were able to get it from is Fertile Fiber. Have a look at companies in your own countries that are selling plant-based compost. Now, the reason why this is important is because some of the compost and manure or even fertilizer, anything that's being sold right now, have a lot of remains from slaughterhouses. So things like bone meal, fish meal, blood products. We don't want any of that in our gardens. Any vibrations of past violence, any antibiotic residue, pesticide residue. We don't want any of that in our gardens. So let's try and make everything as compassionate as possible. The other important aspect to keep in mind is to try and get that compost that is peat free. So by that, I mean something that doesn't have any peat bogs, that's not taken from something like a peat bog, which is a natural resource where a lot of, let me just get this up for you, where a lot of plants and animals live. And what's happening right now is all the peat bogs in the world are being drained because of really high nutrients. But what we don't want to do is endanger the lives of any wild animals or birds that are inhabiting our planet. Okay, so let me just bring up the slide again for you. All right, so let's go back. So potatoes are another great vegetable. It's really, really easy to grow. So let me just bring up a video for you. And while we wait for this to happen, the way to grow potatoes is to get the seed potatoes first if you can. Now, these are readily available everywhere. And what you want to do is get the seed potatoes and put them on the windowsill. And what you want to do is make sure that the shoots that come out in the potatoes, they come through a little bit and they thicken up. And what happens then is when the shoots come through, what you can do is put it into the soil with the shoots pointing up. And what this does, it encourages the potatoes to start growing really fast, but it's given them a really good start as well. And what happens then is the leaves start coming through. And when the leaves come through, what you want to do is start covering it up with soil. Because what this does, it prevents the potatoes from going green, but also increases the size of the potatoes. It's a great way of making sure that you have enough produce.
So now that the shoots, the sprouts have come through a little bit, all we need to do is dig a hole about 4 inches, stick that in with the shoots pointing up, just like that, and then cover it all up, like so. Next one's about 25 centimeters away, so that's the amount of space you keep in between, and just put a little marker in there, and there you go, done.
Now, the other thing I wanted to show you is how we can literally use scraps of the food that we eat to regenerate. Okay, so if you have, let's move on. First picture is the picture of a lettuce stalk that we were left with after eating it. And we read somewhere that we can regenerate food just by putting that in water. So just have a look. Within a matter of 2 weeks, we were able to get that lettuce growing on the right. What a miracle to witness. Again, we can do this with leeks. We can do this with onions. Experiment. See what you can do with what you're left with. Growing in containers. Now, for any of us who have gardens or no gardens, it's a really good idea to start growing in containers first, because it gives a great environment for seedlings to start germinating. What you want to do is ensure good drainage. because it's not like it's in the garden where if the water gets depleted, the roots can go deeper and get the water. It is just in a container, a confined space. So what you want to do is make sure you have good drainage. Okay, make sure there's holes underneath the container. Good choices to start with when you're growing food in containers is radishes. These grow throughout the year. Spring onions, garlic, lettuces, beetroot, French beans, all of them really good choices and really easy to grow. Herbs are obviously excellent. They can be grown on windowsills. What I want to do is stress that you have enough ventilation wherever you're growing your food, especially indoors. We're growing a lot in our conservatory, and this space gets really hot during the day. So what we have to do is make sure the windows are open. Sometimes we even have to switch on the fan. Just make sure that the seedlings don't burn out in their early stages. Top tip, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now, boost your immunity. And the best way to do this is by consuming more berries, any sort of berry. You know, they're really high in antioxidants, which are needed for our immune system. This year, we thought, okay, you know what? We don't want to get it from the supermarket. Let's try and grow it at home. So we bought these little seedlings, little plants that we had with different berries, and we just put them in the garden. So let's see what happens at the end of the year. Now, before I go on to this slide, I just wanted to share with you what we think about when we think about what to grow. The first point we think about is, can the vegetable or fruit be peeled? And the reason why this is important is because 90% of all the food that we bring into our homes are grown with pesticides. And this residue ends up in their skin. So if you can peel everything that you're eating, you get rid of most of the residue, apparently. But there's a lot of fruits and vegetables that we eat that we can't peel. All the leafy ones, the berries, the tomatoes, aubergine, aubergine you can peel, but there's a lot that we can't peel. So what we did was we focused on them first. So everything that we think that we can't peel and we want to make it organic, that's what we focused on, okay? And secondly, the important point to consider is sunlight. How much sunlight do you have access to? Some plants need full sunlight, some need partial sunlight. So please do your research beforehand, because it'll save you a lot of time after. So another great top tip to share with you, companion planting. This is a way of growing different vegetables together to increase their productivity. What we want to do is make sure that it's not overcrowded, but at the same time nearby enough each other to help each other. Certain plants that have strong scents, like garlic and chives, they really help to hide food from pests. Others, like flowers, bring in predators and pollinators to enable pollination and control insects that might otherwise attack your plants. And what it also does, it discourages fungal and bacterial diseases. Now, because of climate change, because of the fact that every year there's a different weather patterns for all of us, there's high chance of diseases happening. So what we want to do is do everything we can to discourage that. Okay, so here's an example. So if you're trying to grow broad beans, for example, they do really well with brassicas, which are things like lettuces and kale or cabbage. They do well with carrots and potatoes. But what they don't do well with is garlic and onions. So again, if you have limited space, if you're trying to grow a lot of things close to each other, please do your research beforehand, because it'll help you save you a lot of time later. So what we're trying to do is plant sweet corn, peas, and potatoes together. So you have different levels here. So if you imagine sweet corn getting really tall and giving support to the peas, and then the potatoes are growing underground. So you have different balance of roots as well. The first two don't need as much root space, potatoes do. So they form a really good balance with each other. Again, things like rosemary and chives and lavender are the purple flowers. Great to plant around at the edges of the pot because they're really good for resisting pests. But the top tip, if you can, French marigolds and nasturtiums. These are powerful flowers that not only look great, but they're great at deterring pests as well. Again, if you can, grow it in every plot that you have. So start small, experiment. and have a look at each seedling before you start. Takes several years to master, but it gets better every single year. You'll be surprised how much you can do in your first year. So this is what our first year looked like. And we were just surprised at how much actually came through. Obviously, there was a few things that kind of failed. There was so much more that came through, and we learned how to control it the year after. So you have the broad beans, the kidney beans, radishes, spring onions. And the taste is something else. Taste is something like we'd never experienced. Nothing like that, like the ones that we get from the supermarket. It's absolutely delicious and amazing. So another opportunity for questions. One of the questions that we got through was tips on improving soil health. Now I'll try and go back to some of the slides that might have been missed out when we were trying to get it back. And this is a great question. Thank you for asking. So like what I mentioned earlier, the foundation, the health of the soil is paramount, because without that, we're not able to get good produce. Okay. So if you go back to this, understanding your soil. The key to improving your soil health is to keep adding more organic material. Organic material is just rotting peels, fruits, anything that you're left with that is raw, that's carbon based. So even things like cardboard, newspaper, all of this is organic material. And what you can do, if you mature it in certain ways and add it to the soil, this adds organic matter. Because if you think about soil, it's in a confined space and it is limited. So if you imagine it with having, this many amount of nutrients, within 4 to 5 years, those nutrients are going to get depleted. So just like anything else, we need to make sure that we're adding more and more nutrients. And we don't have to buy this. This is something that comes from our house, from the way we're living. And secondly, encourage worms. Please don't kill them. Worms are our best friends, because what they do is they recycle everything, all the organic matter, and they also create little channels in the soil that helps to circulate oxygen to the roots. And this is very important again. So let me just share with you a little video that we made.
So we're just digging out soil to sow the seed potatoes. Now, it's really important that we're as careful as possible, because I'll show you why. While we're digging, we'll meet some of our friends here. These guys are the hard workers who work tirelessly to make sure that everything's recycled. Everything that's wasting can be returned back to a state where, the plants can use nutrients. So these guys are our friends, and let's be really careful not to hurt them. So if you find one, just keep it on the side, okay, and let it go. I know it's really difficult, especially when you're digging, but just do your best to try and make sure that none of them get hurt. And what you do is just maybe use your hands, dig a little bit more.
The other important point is drainage. Now, please make sure that your soil is not too waterlogged, or it's not too thin, not too sandy, because what you want to do is have a balance. If it's too sandy, the water goes away. If it's too clayey, if it's got too much clay in it, there's a lot of water retention, which might not be good for certain plants. Try and get a balance in it, okay? Dig or no dig, if you're doing this for the first time in the space that you have, you might have a lot of weeds that are there. Now, weeds are our friends as well. They're just plants growing in the wrong space. But what you want to do is just make sure that you've reduced the amount of weeds in your garden, because they compete with everything that you're trying to grow. Dig it all up, because that helps circulate the air as well. But, as you go along, as you can control your weeds, try not to dig up too much as the soil becomes established. Because what you want to do is keep the nutrients in. You don't want to expose them to the elements. And a great way of doing this, great way of adding fertility to the soil, is something called green manuring, which is what we're going to go through next. If you have a look, sorry. Now, green manuring is something, again, I discovered just a couple of years ago. It's an excellent way of using winter sunlight, which is otherwise wasted. Nothing happens in the garden when it's winter. So this is a way of using it. So what you do is grow something like, leguminous plants or clover or certain weeds that only last throughout the year, and you grow that in autumn time. So what these tend to do is start capturing the light and the winter light. And this energy is stored within them. So what happens then is when springtime comes, just before spring, dig them into the soil, because this adds organic matter, this adds fertilizer to the soil and adds nutrition and nutrients to it. The tops obviously can be composted, which we'll go through next. And the bottom bits, the roots and the shoots, everything else can go into the garden. Now, if you're not doing this, if you're not composting, I would highly recommend you start. It is an excellent way of reducing waste. Like I mentioned earlier, we've more than half the amount that we throw away. There's so little in our rubbish bins now, because everything that we produce food, and what we're left with after producing food ends up in the composter. Even things like cardboard boxes, newspaper, all of it ends up in the composter. And the fact that the composter, breaks it all down, every few weeks I check it, and the amount that I've thrown away starts going down. It's the earthworms, it's all the organisms that have started breaking it all up. Now we have to remember, if all of this waste, this organic waste, ends up in our bin, ends up in a landfill, and that has the potential of being converted into methane. As we already know, methane is 23 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than CO2, so we want to try and avoid it. Okay, so try and get a composter. And some of the things that you can put on the composter, everything from raw, uncooked food remains. Try not to put animal products in it, like things like dairy, eggs, and meat, because it tends to stink and it doesn't decompose really well. Weeds, before you put weeds, now weeds are a great addition to the composter, but before you put them in, make sure you wilt them or you keep them underwater for a month, because if they're alive, they start to grow within the compost. You want to avoid twigs and thorns, but you can add cardboard, paper, make sure it's not laminated. Even grass cuttings. Now, again, we used to mow the lawn and just put all the grass cuttings in the bin. But this is one way of actually recycling the nutrition from our space. We don't want to take the nutrients that are inherent in your space, in your garden, and throw them away. You want to reuse them. Okay, so this is what composting looks like. Try and get a good balance between the browns and the greens. If you have too much green, put more brown in it, and vice versa. Takes about a year or two, but in the end, the compost, the material that you end up with is powerful stuff. Absolutely incredible. So we just had a question about putting weeds in the compost. Yes, you can, but please make sure that they're wilted or they've been put underwater, because what you want to do is make sure that they're not living anymore. Okay, now just a couple of tips with composting. I wasn't doing this, but this is something that we've started. Try and turn the material every few weeks. What I do now is have a metal rod, a long metal rod, put it in the compost, and just circulate it. Just turn the material over, because it helps to circulate it. Okay, takes about 1 or 2 years for it to be made. Make sure it's covered. Try and add water if it's too dry, and try and create those conditions, because you will notice heat coming from it as everything starts to decompose. And you can have a composter that's made from plastic or wood. I would recommend getting a large plastic one, because it's not like you're going to throw it away, you're going to keep reusing it. Lasts for many, many years. Wood, on the other hand, does decompose. Okay. Okay, so any more questions, any more thoughts, reflections? Okay, so there was just a question now, should we keep waste for a week or a few days before we add it to the compost, if I'm not mistaken? It depends on what it is. If it's not something like weeds, you can just put it straight in. Another question about how to keep leaves green. Now, this again depends on the amount of sunlight, the light that they're getting. Sometimes if it's too much or too little, it does tend to change the color. Just try and make sure that they're getting enough light. I think I would probably say that. What is the correct amount of water? Well, again, quite easy to tell. You just need to put your finger into the compost or into the soil and check it. If you feel it's dry, make sure you water it. The surface layer of compost tends to dry out quite quickly, but you'll be surprised if you put your finger in, it'll be quite wet underneath. So just keep checking it with your finger, and you'll know what to do. Okay, now growing indoors and outdoors. This is what we're doing. We're having containers indoors and outdoors, so we know what's growing where. Let's carry on. Now, if you have a look at the picture on the left, this is a used up onion, the middle part of an onion that we'd used. And again, we put that straight into the soil, and this is what's coming through right now. Used up scraps of food are regenerating into food itself. Again, a miracle to witness, and we're so happy that we did this and want to do more of it this year. Okay, so some do's and don'ts before we finish off. Try and avoid chemicals, because what you want to do is, again, grow food as compassionately as possible. Like I mentioned earlier, the amount of slug pellets that are being used here, especially in England, is shocking. And what happens is not only do the slugs die, but the hedgehogs and all the other animals that ingest it end up dying as well. But let's try and think of it from a human sense. Now, if we want to prevent getting ill, if we want to stop ourselves from getting some of the common colds and flus, you want to be as healthy as possible. So boost your immune system. So in the same way, if your plants, if your seedlings, if your vegetables, if they're healthy, if they've had enough light, if they've had enough water, if they're growing strong, the soil is healthy, there is less chance of them getting diseases and being attacked. The other point to add is, in the initial stages, seedlings are like babies. You really do need to look after them, check them every day, maybe twice a day. But the more you give them care and love in the beginning, the stronger they get later. Try and avoid overcrowding, because what you don't want to do is spreading disease because things are too close to each other. And try and cut off infested tips. We've had a lot of aphids attacking our broad beans. And what we try and do, firstly, what I try and do is just spray them off. So what I have is a mixture of soapy water, and I just spray it on the leaves and they end up just falling off. You can also cut off the tips, but make sure whatever you're using to cut the tips off, make sure you try and sterilize it in between, okay? Because you don't want to spread them. If you're bringing new plants in, make sure that you've kept them in isolation for a couple of weeks as well. Okay, so again, please do your research when it comes to some of the potential diseases and pests that might attack some of your fruit and veg. Yeah. So tips on how to prevent this. Again, try and pick them off because you don't want to kill them. Try and check it every day. Use netting. We had an incident last year when we had lots of kale growing and we were happy and everything was going well. We woke up one day and all the leaves had disappeared. And on closer inspection, we realized that it was just full of caterpillars. So what had happened is butterflies had come, laid their eggs, and these caterpillars in the early stages are very hungry, so they end up eating everything. So this time what we've done is we've got netting, we're using it to cover some of the leafy vegetables that we're growing. Using cardboard squares, carpet squares with a slit. If you have a look on the picture on the left, a great way of preventing flies from laying eggs and attacking the roots, okay? Have a look, there's so many ways of preventing pests. Now, autumn leaves, for a lot of us, this is something that happens every year. If you have a lot of trees and shrubs and bushes around where you live, every year you get lots and lots of leaves falling. And what we used to do is just gather them and put them in the bin. But what we realized is that 83% of all the energy locked up in the trees is actually contained within the leaves. So you don't want to throw them away. This is nutrition. This is nutrients you want to make use of. So what you do is create something called leaf mold, a great way of adding nutrition to the soil. You collect the leaves in a bag, in a bin bag, put some holes in it, make sure it's nicely aerated, and leave for 2 years. That's all you have to do. Because what this does, it starts to decompose them. And this turns into something called leaf mold, which you can use as mulch. For those of us who might not be aware, mulch is a way of covering your space so that weeds don't come through. You can also dig this decomposing leaf mold into the soil to add nutrition to it. You can use it as winter cover to, again, suppress weeds, or you can use it as potting compost. Now, we had a question earlier in the last session that we did, and this was about the difference between seed sowing compost and potting compost. So if you have leaf mold on its own, again, you can use this straight away as seed sowing compost. You can use it to germinate seeds. But if you want to add more nutrition to it, please make sure you add more sand, more garden compost, and more good quality soil to this potting compost mixture that you have. Because if you don't have a garden, if you're growing everything in pots, please make sure you have a good mix of different things happening, because you want to add nutrition. Plants can't otherwise get it. Okay, so as a summary, just like babies, avoid early stress, keep down the competition, rotate plants every year. Another great tip. So imagine if you're growing potatoes on one side of your garden, the pests will come through and they will find their way. So what you do is next time, grow them somewhere else. So the pests that have established themselves in that previous area, they don't have access to what you're growing. Keep rotating it, and that reduces the chance of them getting attacked. And the best way to start is to grow them indoors and then transfer out. Watering, we answered this earlier. Make sure it's not overwatered or underwatered. And soak water down to the roots, not large areas of soil. A lot of the times when we spray it all over, the water evaporates easily. Make sure you soak the roots, especially of larger plants that you've already started growing. And in times of drought, which happens here every year, there's been times when we can't water the lawn or we can't water, what we're trying to grow outside. There's a government ban on it. Again, try and just, do the most valued plants first, the long soak. You don't have to do this every day, but just make sure they have enough water in the soil. The best tip that we were able to use this year is to use this book to guide us through the process. And this book we had actually, we always had it on our shelf for many years, and we never used it. And it was bought for 50p from one of the libraries that was throwing books away. And for some reason, I picked it up earlier this year, and I was just surprised and inundated with the amount of information that was stored in this. So we have a lot of these kind of books just floating around that we don't open up. Please have a look. There's so much good advice in them. A great, excellent resource for what you're about to embark on is this study circle material that's available online at the link that's printed up on that slide. It goes through everything from growing your own food, conserving resources, serving the needy, and diverting food away from landfills. Excellent resource. It talks about community gardening, how to engage the community, establishing composting program. I was blown away when I went through this, and I would encourage everyone to access this. It's readily available online, along with other study circle material on saving the planet. Please have a look. Great pointers on it. Now, one of the most precious gifts you could give to someone is the food that you've grown in your garden. These are vegetables that are given to me by my patients. A lot of my patients are experienced gardeners, and they do this in their free time. And I was so touched when they bring their own produce in to give to me. And I have learned so much just by listening to them. My patients are my teachers. So after the treatment, the exams, everything's done, I sit with them and we have a great conversation about gardening, about growing food. And a lot of the tips that I've shared with you have actually been shared to me by my patients. And what a great way of engaging the community and bringing the community together. The best way to succeed is to learn from mistakes and failures. And I will promise you, you will get better at this every single year as you do this. Okay, so just before we end, I would like to recommend a search engine called Ecosia if you're not using this already. All the searches that you do, any research that you do on the topic or anything else, try and use this search engine, because I've looked into what they do. Some of the money that we make through the searches that we do, it is used, a lot of it is used in growing trees in some of the most deprived areas in the world. I've had a look at the accounts, I've had a look at some of the projects that they're involved in. Inspiring stuff, inspiring and powerful. So highly recommend we start using this excellent search engine. So I would like to end by giving you all a challenge. Before we go through any more questions, this is your challenge. Grow your own. Start growing your favorite foods from seed. Chant the Gayatri mantra to it every day. We do this at 9 o'clock every day in the evening. And record your experiences with photos and videos and send it. Send it to us at servetheplanet@satyasai.org. It would be so great to have a compilation, a great library or in the end of everything that you're having success with, everything that you might have learned. Please share it with us. Okay. So we've had a few more questions in. One of them is about controlling slugs. Now, these are a problem, unfortunately. Number one, try and pick them off, pick them up and try and put them away in another space when you're not growing anything. Another way to discourage them is to put sharp material around what you're growing, pebbles or any rocks or any pieces of anything that you have that is sharp. Apparently, copper tape around the containers around what you're growing works really well. Copper rings, copper tape. And what else? I think that's all I can think of right now. Question on aquaponics if you don't have a back garden. Aquaponics, yeah, this is an area that I have started reading on. I do not know much about, but I know it's a way of using water and limited space and limited soil to grow your food. Have a look into this. I would encourage everyone to have a look in this because this looks like the future, especially as we're running out of space. How to mulch? Now, again, a great question. If you allow me, I'm actually going to show you how to do it. We've got a few more slides there if you had time. Now, mulching, great way of weed control. It's one of the easiest ways of doing so. Now, I dug up my garden and took, got rid of all the weeds. But if you have a space where there's a lot of weeds, what I would suggest to do is firstly get rid of all the weeds that are perennial. And by that, I mean the weeds that have really deep roots. Because even with mulching, it's a little bit difficult to get rid of some of the weeds that have deep roots. Have a look. If they're quite high, if they're quite established, pull them out. But for everything else, what you can do is just cover it up. Now, the things that you can use to cover the space that you have is old carpet, newspapers or cardboard, or covered with grass clippings. Cover that space up and leave that starting from autumn time or any other time that you start with. And what you will find is this is what will happen. Have a look at the first picture. Lay the impenetrable mulch down. So we're using carpet in this stage. After 1 month, roll it back to allow the slugs to go underground because you will find a lot of insects gathering underneath your carpet. In late spring, so if you have started this in early spring, in late spring, you will be able to plant seedlings through the holes in the mulch. So this will not only make your garden really neat, but you'll know exactly what you're growing where and suppress the weeds as well. Autumn time, a few months later, remove all the mulch, whatever you used after the last harvest. So after the last food you've taken off, remove the mulch and you will be left with the third picture. Look how nice that looks. No more weeds, just a space where you can easily start growing food. And then another great tip is to overwinter, like I mentioned earlier, green manuring. Grow clover, beans, any other sort of things like fenugreek as well. Cover it up because when spring comes, you can dig that all in and add nutrition to the soil. Okay, picture about weeds, you can compost them. Another question is, should they collect waste through the week or month before it's added to the compost? Like I mentioned earlier, it depends on what it is. If it's weeds, you need to give them some time before you add that. If not, you can add it straight away. Do I collect rainwater? This is something we do plan to do using water buds, or even some sort of way of collecting water that collects on the roof and goes down the gutter. So we do want to look into this. I know some of you are already doing it. water butt is something that you can get in DIY shops. And this collects the water that comes from the gutters. Do plants dry because their time is over? Sometimes they do. It depends on what plant it is. So for example, potatoes, the best time to start harvesting them is when the little flowers come through. Again, it all depends on what kind of plant it is. There was a mention about quarantining plants before introducing to your garden. Yes, it is vital that we do that, especially if you're bringing established plants from any garden centers. Keep them away from the other plants that you have already established, because what you want to do is make sure that they do not have any disease on them that might spread. So keep them away for a couple of weeks and then introduce them close to each other. Okay. Like I mentioned earlier, weeds can be our friends. Now, I had an epiphany about weeds. I was just thinking about them. And I was thinking that without the virulent nature of weeds and trees and all this greenery that we have on this planet, without their virulent nature, there would be no way that they would have colonized the earth as they did more than 3 billion years ago. Because if that had not happened, we would not be breathing in the oxygen that we're breathing in right now. Weeds and some of the other plants that we have colonizing the earth, you could do anything to them, in terms of not even give them water. They would be, exposed to extra sunlight, extra heat. And despite all of that, they still come through and they still flower and they still add beauty to any space. And I feel that this is something that I want to be more like. Life's going to throw us a lot of challenges throughout the time that we're alive. And if you get that example, if you look at weeds and how they're able to be resilient through anything that comes to them, I think it's a really good way of looking at our challenges and being resilient and tough through them. Be like weeds, I would say. I think it's quite funny, but I think it's a nice way of looking at it. Weed mat to control weeds. I don't know what weed mat is. If it's, I think Sister Regina just said that they have used weed mat. Sister Regina, would you like to talk about it for us?
Sairam.
Yeah, Sairam, sister.
Yeah, we've used that weed mat, which is, before we plant the plants, once we prepare the soil, and I just pin it, making sure there is some kind of canals and drainage features that's already incorporated. It's a breathable mat, and it locks in the moisture, and especially during the hot summer days, it helps retain that moisture in the soil. So it works out great. And also other alternatives, I think we have used in our, the family garden is using shredded cardboard boxes. And I think someone shared that tips earlier as well.
Excellent. Excellent, sister. Thank you for that. Can you all hear me? Okay, just wanted to share with you some more tips about how to create a really nice space for wildlife. Why is it important? Obviously, we want to create a haven for them. If we think about, who they are, if you think about the spaces that we have, all of the spaces that we have were once their homes. So we want to give them their homes back. Okay, let's not try and over tidy the garden. Let's try and keep a little bit more natural, a little bit more organic. Presence of water, especially in summer, hot summer months. Make sure you have little containers all over your garden to give water to the birds, to the insects, to the animals. They're constantly searching for water. We're so lucky we have a tap and we open it and we get all this water, but these beings are constantly searching for water. Provide winter homes for pollinators like bees. We're going through an insect Armageddon right now, and there is a global collapse of insect populations all over the planet. If we think about who they are, they form the base, that they form the vital stage, the vital part of our ecosystems. If they disappear, all life on Earth will disappear, no doubt. Especially when it comes to earthworms and bees, if they disappear within a few months, all food will stop growing. We will not have any food left. Try and make a wooden box for hedgehogs, or even have a few rocks that have a space underneath them. It'll be a great home for them. And grow flowers that attract ladybirds. Plants like fennel are really good, and you can distract aphids as well by growing flowers like foxgloves. Okay, let's have a look. Any more questions? Ladybugs are great as they eat aphids. Yes, great food source for them. What we want to do is you create a space where everything works naturally. Create that natural cycle that is abundant in natural habitats. What else is there? So if you have a look. Again, with weeds, like I mentioned earlier, if they're deep-rooted, make sure you get rid of them. And everything else, you can use it in lots of ways to add fertility to the soil. Encouraging birds, we've found that we're getting a lot of robins in our garden, a lot of blue tits, tree sparrows, and it's so nice, when we sit in the garden and we get involved in a lot of webinars, and we sit out there studying or reading, and it's so nice to be completely surrounded by bird song. Again, give them water. If you're giving them peanuts, make sure they're free from aflatoxin. You can get special peanuts from them from some of the garden centers. And shrubs and small trees like holly and bearberries and any kind of natural vegetation that you have, it forms a major part of their diet and even creates a home for them. Any other questions coming through? No? Okay. I think I want to pass it over to Sister Kalai. Thank you very much. Before I do that, thank you all for your attention. Thank you all for being with us and sharing this time with us. Jai Sai Ram, everyone. Let's pass this over to Sister Kalai.
Sairam, everyone. Thank you, Brother Keval, for that absolutely interesting and inspirational webinar. It's great to see most of the pictures are actually from your own garden and trying and failing, and actually what we're getting is the benefit of all your learnings over the last few years. To everyone, the slides and the recording will be shared with everyone that has signed up or registered for this webinar. We will also put the information on the satyasai.org/young adult or YA/serve the planet, and you can have a look there. There's also more hints and tips, other study circles regarding food and nature, gardening, etc., that you can find, many resources. There's also a 108 tips booklet that was released in 2018 that you'll find very interesting. If you have any other questions, and you think of anything over the coming weeks once you start your garden, as Keval mentioned, you can send your questions to servetheplanet@satyasai.org, and we will answer your questions. And with that, I will hand over to Sister Bijal to close.
Thank you, Sister Kalai. I'm sure we are all feeling enthused and very much energized to get started. I think today's webinar, I feel, has rekindled that inner yearning to really reconnect with Mother Nature and appreciate all that she has given us. And what a beautiful day to start International Mother's Day. Let us look after Mother Nature as she looks after us. I think before we end today's webinar, let us hear some words that Baba has shared with us about nature. Swami tells us, spend your time in the contemplation of the beauties of nature that spread out before you in earth and sky. Green expanses of the crops you have raised, cool breezes that waft contentment and joy. The panorama of colored clouds, the music of the birds. Sing the glories of God as you walk along the buds of fields and the banks of the canal. Samasta loka sukhino bhavantu. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Sairam, everyone.